Welcome everyone. I think we're going to commence. So very keen to introduce this amazing panel of speakers today. So welcome to the webinar on establishing partnerships with businesses to eradicate contemporary forms of slavery. A couple of housekeeping rules before we begin. The webinar is recorded and it will be later shared on our YouTube channel. Also, if you have any questions or comments as the panelists are speaking, please add them in the comment section. If you have questions, you can also add them to the Q&A section of Zoom at the very bottom. And our team member, Charlotte here, will be also posting some of our social media information, Twitter channel, as well as links to how to become a member if you're interested in becoming a member of the network. And understanding a bit more about it as well. So there'll be things to keep an eye on in the chat box. So just a quick introduction, this webinar is hosted by the Commonwealth 8.7 network. It's a group of 60+ organizations from around the globe who share a common vision to eradicate contemporary forms of slavery and human trafficking. The network was founded in 2019 by the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. And that same year, the network actually was awarded the Commonwealth Secretary General's Innovation for Sustainable Development Award. The network's mission is to raise awareness, strengthen skills, share good practice, provide support for survivors of modern slavery, and advocate for change to laws and policies in support of all the victims and survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking. Just a quick introduction. My name is Vera Belazalkoska, and I will be your moderator today. My role in my professional life, I'm the director of programs at Ulula. We're a social innovation organization based in Canada, supporting organizations with technology to amplify worker and community voices and monitor human rights abuses in global supply chains. I'm also the vice chair of the Commonwealth 8.7 Network Management Committee and the representative for the Americas and Caribbean for the network. Now, to give a little pretext to the webinar and why we thought this was extremely relevant and important to host today. While there have been many efforts and strides in recent years, we are losing the fight against contemporary forms of slavery, forced labor, child labor, and human trafficking. The numbers continue to increase, and while human rights abuses that include also forced marriage and servitude and sex trafficking are also on the rise, we're seeing an increase in a large proportion of forced labor risks that do occur in global supply chains. So this is in the production of the goods and services that we use every day from trusted brands and companies. Many products are produced and packaged or shipped by people who work under forced labor conditions. And COVID-19 has not made things better. It has further exacerbated these issues and really increasing the vulnerability of migrant workers especially. However, there is hope. There are valuable initiatives, multi-stakeholder collaborations for impact, and really across regions and sectors. And I think the network is a testament of that. There is a trend as well of enacted legislations that businesses must report on their efforts to measure, monitor, and mitigate risks of forced labor in their supply chains. And some jurisdictions are also going towards mandatory human rights due diligence. There is an opportunity here for businesses and companies and social innovators and civil society organizations, especially those at the front line, to collaborate to amplify their impact, partner up, and really make a dent in our collective fight against contemporary forms of slavery. So with that said, I'm really excited and honored to introduce this esteemed panel of speakers. We have Quintin, the co-founder and director of 58, who partners with companies, charities, and other organizations to address the challenges of modern slavery and improve working conditions in global supply chains. Quintin consults widely with companies and governments on modern slavery and ethical supply chains. We also have Godfrey-Sagoo, CEO of Sophie Hayes Foundation that works in the post-statutory care environment of women survivors of human trafficking. She also serves as on the board of directors for UN Women United Kingdom and Anti-Slavery International, and sits as a chair of the Commonwealth 8.7 Network Management Committee. And then finally, we have Meenal Sachdev, the director of and co-founder of Shiva Foundation, an organization that aims to tackle and prevent human trafficking and modern slavery in the United Kingdom. And for 10 years, she's led a youth a leadership nonprofit, Connect India, and was also the first Indian woman councillor for Hertsmere Borough Council in the UK. So I'll quickly hand over to our colleague Charlotte, who's gonna send a quick poll before we commence, and I hand over to our speakers to introduce their organizations. So we just want to learn a little bit about where you are and how you identify yourself. If you've previously partnered with businesses, and if you are a business, have you previously partnered with civil society groups and organizations? And then also, how would you count those initiatives? So while you answer those questions, I am keen to hand over to our three panelists to introduce their organizations in a quick elevator pitch. So let's begin with Red.
Thank you very much, Vera. First of all, thank you very much for everybody from across the world, because we've got multiple time zones going on. So Sophie Hayes, interesting that we're part of this discussion with business partners. In the world that we live in and the work that we do, we believe that sustainable freedom is only possible if individuals are independent. And to be independent, folks have to be employed. They have to have education. And for us, the challenges that we've identified in this sector have been purely around businesses looking to have modern slavery statements, but then not taking the next step to actually employing survivors, providing a living wage, and working towards the lack of re-trafficking. For us, I suppose the interesting thing is Sophie Hayes herself was a white British girl that was trafficked to Italy, and she had an education. She grew up in the north of England and ended up being sold into sexual exploitation. In her journey, the interesting things that did come back were, at the time in the UK, there was starting to be the formation of immediate support. So what does a victim get in the immediate space? But when I ask survivors and victims, my question is always, what's the exit strategy? When do you stop being a victim and a survivor and you actually have an independent life to move forward? And for us, the work that we do is purely around supporting women survivors to having the tools, the skills, and the confidence to be employable. If we can give them that, they have those skills that could change potential generations to come. So for us, the conversation with businesses, we sit on the other side of the business table, and that's why I'm really excited that Meenal and Quintin are part of this conversation.
Thank you, Red. Meenal, over to you.
Sorry. Thanks, Vera, for the introduction, and very honoured, like Red said, to be on this great panel with Quintin and Red. And in terms of Shiva Foundation, we were set up several years ago as a corporate foundation, as a branch set up by Shiva Hotels, a corporate foundation at the time, to just understand what human trafficking, sex trafficking, modern slavery looked like globally, but then we started focusing on the UK. I'm a local councillor and my husband runs Shiva Hotels. So we thought, why not just start with looking at these two areas of local government and hospitality to see how this crime is sort of playing out in these two areas, what's being done to address it. And at that time, which is pre-Modern Slavery Act, there was very little recognition that even existed in the UK. And a lot came as a surprise, and it was a real journey that we went on. But obviously over time, we looked at how we could, as a foundation, look at the gaps within this journey, work with people, collaborate. What does collaboration look like? What does best practice look like? And we sort of figured out sort of three areas, which was immediate relief and support, and then sort of building frameworks as with our partners and tools to help the fight against human trafficking. And then finally, how can we translate these tools into policy advocacy and input within that as well? So on the business front, we created a Stop Slavery Blueprint, which is being used across 90 hotels right now. And we piloted it across our hotels initially, which is a comprehensive guide to how to tackle the issue, how to spot victims, how to address supply chain slavery. And then on the local government front, we created a Hearts Modern Slavery partnership with 100 stakeholders, looking at how this is playing out within our local area and how we could do more work to amplify with victims at the middle of it, how we can actually make sure that their journey within this, they receive the necessary support, and that everybody's aware and then being trained. So those are the sort of two areas we've been looking at. So looking forward to sharing more with everybody else today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Meenal. And over to Quintin.
Thanks, Vera, and likewise, it's fantastic to be on this panel with Meenal and Red, and thanks for moderating us as well, Vera. And for everybody who's joining from around, I heard there was somebody from New Zealand. That's my home country. So I have grown up and worked across different parts of the Commonwealth. My background is kind of in NGO and business worlds, and so it's exciting to see this panel looking at how those two worlds better come together. It's something that we really try to do through 58, is seeing how to bring from boardrooms to the grassroots of supply chains, how to bridge that gap as quickly as possible, to bring insights from all aspects of the supply chain and value chain to help bring faster solutions to the challenges that Vera was talking about at the beginning. So we do that through a mix of research and development, through technical solutions, and through some consulting and training work with business and with NGOs as well. So really great to be with you all, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. And we've divided this panel in a bit of like 3 pillars or topics of discussion. We have no presentations and slides. This is a sharing experience, and then we'll hopefully have 10 to 15 minutes at the end to hear your questions and have the panelists have a chance to answer them. So the first topic, we want to ask our panelists, what do they see as the main role of business in the fight against modern slavery from their very unique perspectives? Like, what is unique to businesses and industry? And I'll begin with Red, and then over to Meenal, and then Quintin.
So as I said earlier on, my perspective is slightly different to Quintin's and Meenal's. The things that we've identified at Sophie Hayes, and I was looking at the data recently, we have in the system from the last few years about 475 women, of which 75% of those women have come from nationalities and cultures where access to education and employment has either been denied or restricted. That in itself causes a question around how businesses are engaged to support victims and survivors. How is that knowledge shared? How is that knowledge transferred? And then on top of that, the other things that we picked up on are that a significant large amount of the women that we work with have not passed grade school. So they've not actually had full education. The byproduct of all of this work has also shown that the majority of women, when they are asked about being employed and being fully functioning, sustainably free, they always default to domestic roles. They don't think of careers. They don't think of actually doing anything other than culturally what they were brought up in. And the challenge that we have when we think about business is, especially in the UK, there is this huge push towards having modern slavery statements. So if you've done a modern slavery statement, that's the checkbox, you've checked it off. And my push, being slightly more vocal on this space as well, is if you have a modern slavery statement, should there be an expectation that you will actually commit to hiring survivors as well? Is that the next progression that we have to deal with? And then that opens the door to a living wage. It is no use having survivors being employed where they are living below minimum wage, and then the vulnerabilities of being re-trafficked then become even more exposed. Out of everything that we've been working on for the last couple of years, there are some key factors that have come out of it, which I think at times are not shared with the business world. And I know I have some great friends on this call at the moment from the NGO world. We are a little bit protective. We all like our little boxes and our silos. And I'll own this from the NGO world. We probably don't communicate enough with the business sector to share with them the learnings that we are having and we are making. But the things that we picked up on are that survivor journeys are not linear. You know, they just because they have the ability to get into employment, their lives are not linear. They will go backwards and forwards. So having employment which is supportive and sustainable is as important. The other thing as well is just from being independent, for a survivor that has a criminal record through exploitation, that is a significant barrier to being employed and getting into education. And then there's the inequities. We have survivors that have applied for roles with a organization on different parts of the country, and they've literally had different experiences, even the HR process of getting into those roles. So for us, the wrap up of everything that we've been picking up on with the business sector is we're getting very good in the charity world, in the civil society world, of supporting survivors and victims. We're getting better and meeting needs. What we're not getting better at is that link to the business world to say survivors ultimately, like you and I, need to be employed. We need education. How do we bridge that gap? And how do we make it that the vulnerabilities of the survivors are their own journeys, but within a HR, formal policy HR perspective, how do we build those policies so that everybody has an equal chance? And I think from the business perspective, we get one of two reactions when we actually, because in the work we do, it's over a year to get folks, our women, to feel comfortable to get to a point where they look for an internship or a placement. We help them secure placements, and this is where with Meenal and Shiva we've had some groundbreaking work done. When we talk to businesses about could you possibly offer an internship or a paid placement or a volunteer experience, businesses usually have one or two reactions. One is absolute horror, because they are so afraid of the word modern slavery and a victim, and they don't have the knowledge and comfort to know how to address it. Or they actually go the other way and they're totally on board. Yes, it's, we have modern slavery statement, but we believe it's our moral right as well to actually do more. It's the group that gets horrified when we say these are victims, I think, is where the biggest amount of work needs to be done. So in that space, I'm going to kind of just pause there, because I would like to talk a little bit about the HR piece and how Shiva Foundation have helped us in addressing what it is for a victim to be employed or in a placement where all of these challenges are in place, because ultimately businesses still have to do what they need to do from a business perspective.
Thank you, Red. And I think that's a nice segue to Meenal, and you sit in a very unique position where both as a counselor, but also as a leader of foundation associated to a hotel industry. How do you see the role of business, and what are some examples where this has really worked, especially in the areas that you represent?
Thanks. So I'll obviously speak to my experience with the work that we've done at Shiva Hotels and across the hospitality sector to date over the last few years. And it's very much based on that sector, but I think that this can be adapted across sectors, and it'll be a very similar experience everywhere in terms of whichever business is addressing this issue currently will probably have a very similar experience to me. But I think I was reading in a recent interview that I was trying to get to know Quintin over by Googling a lot of interviews and articles he's written. And one of the interviews he gave in terms of how his journey started with his wife, he said that about 21 to 45 million people are stuck in some form of slave labor in the world today. And about half of these people are enslaved in the private sector. This makes business sector's responsibility mammoth. And the fact is that, yes, we have taken huge strides in this country to sort of try and elevate the business sector's responsibility around this area, but we have a really long way to go. So as Red just said, like in terms of Modern Slavery Act, if I was just to look at the hotel sector, 90% of the hotel businesses in this country, they don't reach the £36 million threshold. And so the Modern Slavery Act and everything that goes with it in terms of the legal obligations do not apply to them. So there is no legislative or legal obligation there. And we've also seen that it's arguably, even where businesses are reaching that threshold, arguably it's unenforceable, because no real action is being taken for businesses who aren't complying. So I think given the situation, I think it's great that it's gone a very long, this act was monumental in 2015 in terms of raising the awareness and actually telling people that it exists and that business is responsible for this. So, I think it's brilliant that we did that. But ultimately, this many years later, we are seeing that much more guidance and many more iterations are required for businesses to get on board. But that's not to say that businesses cannot be doing sort of self-regulation activities regardless of that. And I think that if I was to talk to the piece of work that we've done, especially across, not just from the training point of view and building pathways across each of our hotels to make sure that victims have a reasonable sort of time frame to get into the NRM, and we're working with the police. But in terms of supply chains and business, it was a real journey to engage our suppliers. And initially, it was, when we spoke to our HR, it was a question of, look, we've got these long established relationships over the last 20 years with suppliers. We don't want to risk those. And so we drafted letter after letter after email to figure out how we can bring them on this journey with us without making them fearful of us or that they don't want to work with us. But actually, after 6 months of those conversations with our own teams and battling with our own people, we realized, to our surprise, that actually a lot of these suppliers were not aware, and they really wanted to embrace this with us. And so if I was going to speak, one of the largest stakeholders within the hotels, within our business, would be the subcontractors, the housekeeping basically, and the housekeeping service providers. So after conducting a sort of risk mapping exercise with our first tier suppliers, we worked very closely with our housekeeping provider, and they employ about between 3,000 and 4,000 housekeepers within that company. It's one of the largest in the UK. And it actually became a very collaborative journey we went on, learning and working to improve our collective practices. And we saw some tremendous impact and results coming out of that. And today, one of the results we've seen, one of the outcomes we've seen, is all of the staff within that organization, not just the ones that work for us, are now trained with an adapted version of our blueprint that we can just help them create for their own housekeeping. And that's now being spread across various companies. So that one example shows that actually going on that collaborative journey, starting this journey, led to so many different results across sectors, not just across different companies. So it's possible. We've seen it's possible. I think we shouldn't be waiting for the government to come up with more plans and more enforcement. We should figure out ways of regulating, talking to each other. We should, in terms of good practice, we really suggest that businesses access their industry and start talking, and they basically look at and identify where the risks of exploitation is the highest. And then if they can put practices into place so that workers are empowered and workers are informed about their own rights. And so if the workers themselves within those long supply chains can start reporting, and you're reporting like levels of abuse, then actually that supply chain itself starts working in a different way, where you start upholding certain standards. And so I think it's all about empowering the workers within those supply chains, and the businesses will follow suit. And I think the businesses have to talk to be able to do that, and they have to set standards. So coming back, in conclusion, I think that the role of business is vital to eradicating this crime.
Yeah, and for a Commonwealth country like Canada that is yet in the process, it's currently in the process of possibly enacting some law, the lessons learned from the UK and other versions, more strict and more stringent, are definitely very useful. And you've already touched on so many partnership aspects, so this is really quite interesting. And Quintin, from your perspective and how you've been working with businesses directly to support them in this process, how do you, from 58's perspective, see the role of business in this fight?
Yeah, it's it's really interesting. I think where we first started looking at, I guess, a lot of the challenges around modern slavery and the ways that they impact business. I guess our starting point as 58 was looking at what is the primary purpose of business, and kind of how does business's role connect to addressing this challenge. And I think for us, business is kind of the primary way that quality of life is developed or provided in our communities and nations. And these businesses are primarily made up of people. They're ultimately people that want to be able to use their skills and abilities to provide income for their families, to ideally to grow or advance in their profession, to grow in themselves personally. And I guess often we attribute different value to people working in a business depending on their role, or perhaps where they work within the supply chain. But I guess business needs everyone who works within it, either directly or indirectly, to make it a success. And I guess if that's the starting point, then ultimately, I guess the business sector's responsibility in eradicating modern slavery comes down to ensuring that people are able to have a job that is good, that they're able to have a job that enables them to do those things that's good for them and their family, but that is good for the businesses they work for as well. And I guess two of the primary ways that we try to do that as 58, or two of the areas we're most focused on. One is related to those workers who are in forced labor and supply chains that Meenal referred to. Around 50% of those, it's estimated, are in debt bondage in supply chains, and a lot of that debt bondage comes about from misinformation, or just the sheer number of recruiters or agencies that are involved in people's recruitment, particularly migrant workers that are looking for, or having to look for work overseas because jobs or good jobs are not available close to home for them. I guess it's important to note as well that we're talking about modern slavery, but they're often, for companies thinking about this issue in their supply chains, there's many areas where people are exploited or deceived in less extreme ways. So it might not be as extreme as modern slavery, but there's still issues around their wages or working hours or their accommodation, information that they were given that still may ultimately lead to modern slavery. It may not, but is still a form of exploitation for that person. And so just thinking again about providing work that is good, I think if that's our primary aim, then it's a good way of starting to think about how we partner together to address it. Another area is around child labor in supply chains, and I guess it's often an invisible area of impact for companies. The latest child labor stats came out today from the ILO and UNICEF and others, and they estimate there's 160 million children globally in child labor, and of those 79 million are in hazardous work, and so it's especially that hazardous work that I think is a really key area for companies to tackle, and this is where it becomes especially important for businesses working together with NGOs and vice versa to share their learning expertise and the ways that the role and influence that business has, and the insight and experience that NGOs have in communities to tackle issues like child labor, which are often geographically focused in things like minor agricultural commodities or in artisanal mining, and I think as others have said already, finding kind of cross-industry or industry-specific ways of tackling those challenges.
Yeah, and especially on topics as complicated as child labor, where a rights-based approach is necessary, because of course a child helping a coffee harvester father to spread coffee beans after school is very different than a child working in hazardous conditions, mining mica all day, every day, not going to school. So I think that's exactly where nonprofits and local organizations can really provide value and knowledge to businesses who are sourcing these products, and really, really have an interest and dedication to tackling child labor issues in their supply chains. Thank you. Really, now it's a great transition to the next question, which is more about your stories. In your work, how have your organizations partnered with business, and what are some best practices and any stories you'd like to share with the audience? And we'll start with Meenal this time.
Yeah, so partnership working, I guess I said a lot about that in the first instance, but look, I think for all sectors, partnership working is really crucial, and it just isn't like traffickers and these exploiters, they operate in sort of, they have so much coordination and are so sophisticated in their approach that actually we need to do the same to get ahead of them. And so even in business, like we need to use our skills and our strengths to do the same and to collaborate. And if we can do that, then I think that the strength in numbers would mean that we can be setting standards which are much higher, and it prevents a lot of undercutting. And businesses individually, if they're working in silos, they don't actually have enough leverage to do this by themselves or to make any sort of significant difference to these business models. So I think there is a lot to be said, and we've seen a lot within our business, having worked with various organizations, be it civil society organizations, police, government. The cross-sectoral working is really necessary and powerful when it comes to fighting this crime, and it just cannot be done by one sector or one business. If I am going to speak to one of our brilliant partnerships, that's definitely with Sophie Hayes, and Red is here. So she mentioned earlier, but we've been very lucky to have this collaboration with Sophie Hayes, and to actually have that sort of victim-centric approach, and employability is so important. And we've seen from this partnership, and this partnership has come about after a lot of conversation and relationship building, and it's been a real three-way process, both between, so the three key players have been the victim themselves, Sophie Hayes, and Shiva Hotels. And it's been an evolving process, and we've all been learning together in this process, and the partnership work sort of extends beyond just the sort of work placement for that duration of time. For example, Shiva Hotels has been involved with these visa applications and various different bits and pieces that are required. And all our managers who are working with victims have been trained. And it's been brilliant for our teams as well at the hotels. There's been such a value add of doing this and actually seeing this work in practice. And I think one of the things that we've seen, and I've not been as close to it as the hotels have, but one of the things that I've seen from a distance is that some of these victims, and correct me if I'm wrong, Red, but they've gone on elsewhere to get employment, and they've grown a lot in confidence. And this has all contributed and gone a long way in contributing to the sort of sustainable freedom that we talk about, and it's decrease the vulnerabilities to re-trafficking, because of just a sort of 6 to 8 week process has enabled that, because it's been much more than a 6 to 8 week process. It's been about a journey from before they start, and the training they go through, the training that the hotel staff go through, then the duration of the work, the conversations that happen, and then figuring out the next steps. So look, change happens one individual at a time. And this particular partnership has shown the importance of employability, confidence, the risks of re-trafficking, the importance of business sort of working tangibly with victims and survivors, and how actually foundations, business, and victims can work really, really well together. So that's something that we are very, very proud of. So yeah, I think partnership working is great, and I think there's a lot of learning in it for all sectors. And I can give you multiple examples of other work we've done, especially through COVID as well, in terms of setting up emergency accommodation for victims of modern slavery. And we've worked really closely with the police on that. But business really can play a very powerful role. They just need to understand that a lot of them actually want to do more. And I think it's for organizations who know how to do this to then go and empower them, because once they know the formula, a lot of them will just get on with it, because this is sustainable. We're not telling them to go and spend millions of pounds to make this work. We're saying do it. It's just a different lens that's required. It's just a bit of training that's required, and it's a bit of just perseverance and wanting to help. And I think that if we can just figure out a way of making that happen and enabling that journey, they're ready to come on board.
Thank you. Thank you. And Quintin, let's hear from you on this topic.
Yeah, I think that was a really great example of just, I guess, practical partnership. And I wanted to try and give one more from our experience as 58. So one of the things that we do in response to particularly the challenge for migrant workers is we run a mobile platform called Just Good Work, which really aims to try and help migrant workers be able to make good decisions and prevent situations of modern slavery at every stage of their recruitment, both into work and while they're in work overseas. And it came about through hearing about the challenges that workers face, both from migrant workers who were in Qatar, where it initially started, but also companies who are struggling to get visibility and transparency of their labor supply chains. And so though the platform began in East Africa for workers going into the Gulf, we very soon after started working in Malaysia with a UK online retailer, the Vera Group. And they'd, over many years, had identified particular challenges in their factories facing migrant workers pre-leaving Nepal or Bangladesh to come to Malaysia for work. And we've worked really closely with them over the last year, especially with Vera, with one of their factories in Malaysia, and then with the recruitment agencies that they work with both in Malaysia and Nepal. And finally with a local NGO who is able to support workers who have problems. And I think we've been really encouraged by, I guess, the level of engagement, feedback, desire to try and get this kind of tool into the hands of workers from all of those different stakeholders. And I think what it suggests to me is that, I guess, partnerships are best when they're established around a common problem that's maybe identified from different angles, and there's different strengths that organizations can bring to it from those different perspectives. And I think businesses really want to partner with organizations who are helping them solve a problem with the unique expertise or perspective that NGOs or CSOs bring. And I guess we also often look at partnerships as being primarily between organizations, but usually actually they're between people in those organizations. And so I think finding people who share similar values and passions, looking to work to solve a problem together is really key, because it's those personal relationships that ultimately develop and form and sustain these partnerships. And I guess that's how we feel with Just Good Work, that these relationships, these partnerships, they look different in every region, every country that we work in, but they're all built around the same kind of challenge and the same kind of solution. Like, for example, in East Africa, we partner with local NGOs, with faith communities, with different community organizations to help get Just Good Work into people's hands at the earliest stage that they're starting to look at a job or to go into work overseas. And it's those local organizations, the places and people that where people already have a high level of trust, that are really helping get that out faster. And so on all of those different levels, you see these partnerships as not just important, but I don't think we can effectively tackle modern slavery without them.
Thank you for that insight, Fred.
Thank you. So I'm going to share two very different stories, one pre-COVID and one life in COVID. Pre-COVID, trying to deliver support for women, trying to build employability skills, finding a relationship with Shiva and having like-minded people accept that no is not an answer. It's just a holding space to find a solution. And no can never, ever be an option for any survivor. And through that learning, we did figure out all of the legal requirements from a HR business perspective that the NGO world doesn't always understand. The business side of it started to understand from an NGO world, here is how our world is different from the business side, and where do the compromises come. But ultimately, at all times, the survivor is the center of the universe. They are the reason for being. And out of that, we have been able to learn an awful lot from our own growth so that we build stronger programs and understand the business perspective and what they need and what they don't need. But as Meenal's just said, the outcomes of this are, we have women that go to Shiva, they arrive, they have no legal status, they end up at a placement, they need a reference from a placement to get into education, end up at the Home Office, get a reference from us, get a reference from Meenal, and lo and behold, this one woman's life has now completely changed. She has legal status, she has the ability to get a job, she suddenly has the ability to change the future generations of her own generations. So there's the face-to-face environment. The COVID environment obviously has made everybody think about things differently. We converted our entire program online, and next month, I can't announce it now, but next month we'll be making an announcement that for the last year, we've been working with a global IT company to build some online training for victims to stay safe online. So it's the basic training for victims, and this will be free. This is not you've got to pay for it. The plan is that this training for any victim anywhere on the planet would be able to take this basic e-training through YouTube and probably a couple of other sites. Because whether we like it or not, businesses are becoming more and more digital. There is a significant shift to being online, whether you are working, whether you're studying, whether you are actually just trying to register the birth of your child while COVID has happened and all offices are closed. Digital skills now are the absolute criteria that the future will be built on. And we've identified with this global partner, we don't have the expertise to understand how to deliver online safety training to victims. They've stood forward and said, this is in our cybersecurity team, this is what we do every day. And that is the perfect example of a company that has a modern slavery statement, that has a chief exec that is beyond committed to supply chains, but has gone the extra mile and said, we have a product that absolutely could save lives, and we are happy and going to partner with you to build it. So there's that side of business. The last side of the business piece, which is probably a little more out there, talking to chief execs who are slightly more seasoned and mature, having to deal with staff that are now, employees are going to companies because they want to know the ethics and the values of the companies they want to work with. They want to know that a modern slavery statement exists. They want to know that their employer is living and breathing what they're saying. If you are a slightly more, as I am, a slightly more older, mature person, this is a relatively new world. So our approach now is to actually start working with a couple of universities to start working with the future chief execs of industries and start talking about modern slavery now. So as these students go through their careers, they've started on the first rung of a modern slavery statement is great, but how do I, as a future chief exec or a future leader, how do I take this forward? And I think there has to be some investment in the future for businesses to have this adopted in through generations that are coming through. So for us, it's a partnership where skills are brought to the table. The second part of the partnership is direct support for victims to be free and independent. And then the third partnership is, how do we engage the future business leaders? So to them, this is a natural space.
Right, valuable points. Thank you, Red. And now, in cognizant of time, maybe a very short introduction from your team or a comment from your teams on really what, with the changing landscape of legislation around the world and businesses really struggling to figure out how they're going to meet some of these new expectations. And especially, I think, for Meenal and Quintin that work at the front line of business and supply chains, what can businesses do? How can businesses leverage local organizations to really help them monitor, mitigate, and ideally remediate human rights issues in their supply chains? If you can share some of your insights on that.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Vera. I think one of the examples that I wanted to give is I mentioned the child labor challenge and how that's particularly often geographically focused, and I guess often comes about because of a lot of underlying systemic and other challenges around poverty and other issues. And this is, I think, where NGOs and civil society organizations have a a really critical role for companies, because for businesses trying to carry out due diligence from the top down through their supply chains, the reach, often the visibility becomes much harder and harder as you go down through the supply chain. But with a challenge like child labor, I think it's relatively straightforward to see where and how it exists, because it is so geographically focused. So then the challenge becomes more, how do we get the real data and insight from those communities that will enable us as a business or as an industry to really tackle this. And we work through, one of the ways that we work at the moment is through something called the Partnership Against Child Exploitation, and it's a mix of NGO, civil society organization, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, for example, Columbia University, the Global Compact Network that focus on businesses, and World Vision and War Child, who work very specifically in communities. And particularly through COVID, we were undertaking research into understanding where and how children were at work and the way that it finds its way into global supply chains. But without World Vision and NGOs, World Vision and War Child's presence where they were in DRC, in Ethiopia, and Central African Republic, throughout COVID, there's no way that we would have been able to continue getting insight into the way that COVID was impacting children in these communities, the way that the supply chain dynamics were playing out in communities. They were able to provide real live, as it was happening, insight and data into what was impacting children and what they needed to do, or what companies that were engaging through the program needed to do as a result of that. And so I think that's one of the real strengths that NGOs and CSOs have, is this their grassroots insight and intelligence that can help companies drive change and use their influence much faster as well.
Thank you. And Meenal, from your perspective, from the...
So I'll make it quick. I can sort of talk to both sides as a CSO as well as a business, but I think that, look, CSOs can be very innovative. They don't always have the same restrictions and the same agendas that government and business do. So they're in this very unique space where they can be vital to for this shift to happen, and amplify sort of business's role within anti-human trafficking efforts. So if I was to speak to, when we were initially starting off this journey as a business, as Shiva Hotels, without some CSOs, we couldn't have done a lot of the work we did in terms of laying the foundations for the blueprint. So for example, we went we worked closely with Stop the Traffic, for example, to look at audit our entire supply chains for the hotel, for our entire hotel business, which took a very long time, but that was incredibly important and lay the basis for our blueprint then to happen. So that's an example right there of how we couldn't have done that without a CSO being involved. On the other side of it, we've now turned into a bit of a CSO ourselves. We're a foundation, a non-profit. So we've now gone and formulated tools ourselves to support other businesses. So for example, we've been an advisor to a number of businesses, helping with sort of practical support, such as risk mapping, codes of conduct, formulating sort of supplier engagements and how to write these letters for businesses. We've also trialed a new human rights due diligence tools, which we've then sort of worked in partnership to embed within various businesses that we've worked with. And from all this sort of engagement over the last few years, and learning things on a practical level, we've been able to learn what could be helpful from a sort of regulatory perspective in the wake of more sort of legislation coming out. So I think the learnings of these things from both ends show that the role of CSOs is really important. And actually, if you're on this journey as a business, if you want to start this journey as a business, I think that the partnership with the CSO is vital to the progress and the sort of outcomes that you might be looking for as a business.
Thank you. Thank you. That really insightful, great insights, but also really nice and motivating stories about partnership. We can all use a little bit more encouragement these days when the statistics come out and we don't seem to be making great progress. Before we go, there are two great questions, but before we go to them, I have a flag that one of our members also would like to share. a little bit of what they've been doing with a specific research project. So Jonathan, if you're able to chime in and just share a little bit what your organization, a civil society group based in Quebec, Canada, has been doing, that would be very appreciated. Let's see if you are able to join in with your audio.
Hi. Does it work?
We see you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure to hear these stories. I mean, such.
I lost Jonathan just before he started speaking. Maybe before he comes back on, if he does, we can go to our first question. The question reads, it's easier for business to comply at headquarter level, but how do we ensure that they scrutinize the supply chain, particularly in other countries far away from the main office? I think, Quintin, you probably would be well positioned to answer this. And maybe after that, Jonathan, we can go back to you if your internet stabilizes. But yes, Quintin, please go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you touched on it a little bit in response to the last question as well. But I think when it comes to the furthest reaches of supply chains, I think the most effective way for businesses to understand and then to start to take action at that stage is through industry and kind of regional focused collaboration. Because typically at the further reaches of supply chain, you're starting to get into more commodity, so mining or farming, where you're clearly it's not a direct link to your supply chain unless you're a massive global sourcer. So I think finding those industry or regional collaborations is really the most effective way that companies can do that at the furthest reaches of their supply chain.
Thank you, Quintin. And I think we have Jonathan back. Maybe you can turn your camera off if that stabilizes your internet.
It's too bad. My internet's been perfect for the whole webinar. I was able to see everybody clearly, no lag. Sorry about that. If ever it starts lagging again, do let me know and I'll just switch off the camera. Is it good now? Perfect. All right. Okay. So yeah, as I said, couldn't agree more on the importance of involving businesses in the fight against modern slavery. It is vital. And I would also love to take this brief opportunity to share with you a program that is very dear to our organization. It aims at involving businesses of the tourist industry in the fight against human trafficking. So GLOW is a program designed for the tourism industry to act without harm regarding human trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation specifically. So as you may know, and as we've heard in this talk, hotel establishment, and it's important to mention all types of establishments, no matter the size, region, or luxury level, are being used by traffickers for exploiting victims. And there are even recruitment activities that can occur in hotels. So with GROW, as Ms. Sachdev said, forgive me if I mispronounced, as she explained when saying that, we don't ask an enormous, but rather simple effort from hotels. We wanted to equip them as frontline allies in their role in prevention, screening, as well as intervention as referral, so as they have a direct frontline type of contact with the victim. And moreover, we wanted to address a major concern within the hotel industry.
Jonathan, if you hear us, your video and audio have frozen again. Maybe if you can turn off your video, let's see if it comes back on. We did lose him. Okay. For those of you interested to learn more about their program, if you Google Beacon of the Freed, which is the organization that Jonathan works with, you're bound to find some of the
Can you hear me?
You're back. Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's so weird because I keep hearing you perfectly and your audio and your video is good. I guess it's just my output that is not stable enough. So anyway, it's too bad, but I will just put some links in the chat box. I've put simply the webpage of the program. I don't know why the link isn't popping up in blue. Let me put it again.
I think we'd be able to copy
yeah.
paste. And also with the follow-up of the webinar, we can share some of these resources as well. But thank you so much. I do want to get to the final question before the webinar wraps up. But one of the attendees was asking that and commenting that in many cases, victims are too scared to speak up and report when there are tortures involved. So the question from the attendee is, what can we do as human rights activists and defenders if politicians are involved? And that he feels that most times that we're alone when there's no free legal assistance to the organizations to support them to find freedom for victims. And I feel like, Red, you might have really unique insights on this particular question. So I'll leave the floor to you for the final.
And I'll make it brief because I think we're just right on time. So there's, in the absence of knowledge, you build fear. If people aren't empowered with knowledge, then it becomes a very difficult space. And I think that the challenge is when victims are put in a position of being able to speak, they are not appropriately advised or supported to own their voices. So part of this has to be on what are the appropriate channels that victims need to be provided, and what is statutory support against, quite frankly, the charity world having to step in because budgets are being cut. And that's a global issue as economies are being cut. But ultimately, there has to be clear support and guidance, which is in a way that victims understand what their rights are. But it's not just understanding, it's what to do with those rights. It's the knowledge of, I am entitled to this, but this is how I get it. Here are the 5 steps that I've got to take, and here are the organizations or the pathways that will take me there. And I think this is also another area that business and the rest of the world in general could do a better job in. We do lay out paths for other forms of support, but when it comes to legal frameworks, when it comes to an individual having, you shouldn't be put in a position of fear to tell your story, because if that's the case, the system is failing. The system is absolutely failing. So there has to be clarity on how information is shared, when it is shared. Quite often we find the information for victims to own their voices comes too late. It actually comes too late, and the fear has been built up, and we've had, we end up with the situation of being re-trafficked. So it is very, for me, it literally is information, clean, transparent, clear, in a way that victims can understand and not feel overwhelmed and not feel as though they've been legalized as well. That's, we have to accept that, just like I don't understand half of the business world's requirements, I don't understand, because I've not walked those shoes, I don't understand what a victim needs. And the only way we can move past this is not for us to create the pathways, but to build the mechanisms so that the survivors and victims themselves are helping build those pathways. They are the ones that have to be driving the conversations to move forward. We should technically be in a support role. We should not be at the front of the bus.
Such an important final point, Red, that really it should be the voices of those who have the firsthand experience that need to be informing our interventions, policies, legislation. And if those voices are not heard, we are only probably further complicating the issue. And so I think that's a really good final note to end on. Thank you so much for joining and for sharing your experiences and opening up about the work and the partnerships that you've been building across the private and civil society sector. And I want to remind everyone, if you're curious about the Commonwealth 8.7 network, go to our website. Also, you can check out the membership criteria if you want to join, sign up for a newsletter. And again, thank you so much to everyone. And I believe as people are trickling out, Charlotte might send another little poll for attendees. But thank you again, and we really appreciate that you've spent this time with us.
Vera, I could be quite controversial and actually ask one question. How many politicians are out there speaking on behalf of modern slavery that are not victims or survivors themselves?
It's a great one, Red. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Stay in touch, and we hope to be promoting our next webinar in coming weeks. It will be on the impact of climate change on human rights. So stay tuned. That's why it's great to sign up for a newsletter. We hope to see you again. Bye, everyone.
Bye.